So Ash Regan, we're more than 2 weeks into this contest. How's it been for you? Has it been a bit rough? Has it been challenging? Has it surprised you in terms of the scrutiny, the way that you've been reported occasionally, especially by one or two of my colleagues referring to you as a sock puppet, Kenny Farquharson at the time?
Yeah. Yes, it's definitely out of my my normal wheelhouse in terms of what I've been doing before. I got a bit of a taste of what it's like to have that enhanced media scrutiny, obviously when I resigned in October last year, and the media were very interested in me then and were chasing me around the Parliament and so on. But before that, I had never experienced anything like that. It's then obviously gone to a completely new level a couple of weeks ago when I had said that I was putting my hat into the ring, and obviously I was being chased by lots of cameras in Parliament, and there was that Kieran Jenkins bit where they were kind of blocking me from walking past with cameras and things. That I'm not used to that. So I suppose it's just something that comes with this level of, if you go into this level of politics, the press are very interested in what you've got to say and want to put what they think are important questions to you.
Do you think on the whole you've been fairly treated so far in the press?
I haven't actually read all of the press coverage.
Uh-huh.
So I think there's a couple of instances where we've been asked for comments, we've put comments forward, and then you can't quite believe how it's ended up being reported. So yeah, it's interesting at times to see where you put out a comment which you think is quite balanced, and then you see where it ends up. That's quite interesting sometimes.
And how are the dynamics between you and the other two leadership hopefuls? Because obviously they're first and foremost your close parliamentary colleagues, and it's assumed at the very least that you're all three pulling in the same direction ultimately, which is independence.
Well, we're quite a small group, aren't we? If you think about it, compared to Westminster, if they have leadership contests and they've got hundreds of MPs, they could pick an entirely different team and go in a different direction. Whereas, there's only 64 of us, and so we're quite a small team, and the likelihood is that many of the people that are in government will continue to be in government. So I think there is I think we should try to keep this as clean and focused on the policies as possible. I've tried through, I've been in politics for 6-7 years now, and I've tried to, even with the opposition, I always try to play the policies, not the person. You won't find many, me being quoted on anyone saying anything personal about the person. It's always about the policies. So I'm trying to stick to that now. Kate and I actually are friends, so we're actually pals. So that adds another dimension to it. And we're trying to kind of keep in touch with each other, and obviously it's an experience that you go through, but I would like us to still be friends at the end of this, if possible. Hamza and I obviously are colleagues. I wouldn't really describe them, we're more colleagues than friends. But I would like us to stay on good terms. And actually last night, somebody sent me a screenshot of another one of my colleagues retweeting something that I thought was very ill-advised, which was inadvertently criticising Kate, and I sent that colleague a little message to say, is this appropriate? We're all got to be on the same team. I didn't get a very good message back, but I felt like it was important maybe to say that.
Some have questioned already the process of this context. In fact, I'll be more direct, that there are hidden hands, there are resources, let's just call it that, which are basically being channeled in the direction of Hamza being the favoured candidate or the continuity candidate. Is that something that you have had some trouble with or have questioned yourself over?
And there have been already a number of rule breaches by that campaign, which I feel have not been adequately addressed by the party that's running the contest. Potentially, if you were holding the contest in a different way, you could actually exclude someone from the contest because of breaking the rules in a certain way, and that's not being done. So I'm not sure that the perception out there that this has been run fairly. I think we have to be very careful that we don't get into a position where the wider membership don't have trust in the process. I think we could be teetering on the edge of that right now, and that's not a good place to be. I've said that I didn't think it was appropriate, for instance, for Peter Murrell to be running the contest, because obviously, he's married to the outgoing leader. There might be, a conflict of interest there. I think there is. I think they should be using an independent third-party company, so not the company that they normally use to run this, but a different one. And then there should be an independent, maybe a neutral observer as well, just to make sure everything's above board and that all the membership can have trust in the process, because it's not just the leader of a small party. The person that wins this contest is going to go on to become the first minister of the country, so clearly it's a very important issue.
Have you been enjoying the contest so far? Are you glad that you entered it?
Well, I think most people thought Nicola Sturgeon might be going to resign, but I don't think anybody could have predicted that maybe it would be mid-February. I certainly didn't think it would be as early as mid-February. So I think that everybody that's in the contest, probably the timing is maybe not what people would have wanted, and the contest time frame as well is very short. So it's quite a difficult campaign, especially if you're an outsider like myself, to kind of get that momentum, build up your profile and so on. So it's a bit like being thrown at the deep end. But I think a lot of people have said to me, you've got to try and enjoy it. You know, not many people will ever be in a party leadership contest, which is true. That's why I'm trying to enjoy it, but it is also quite tiring and stressful as well.
So when we spoke a couple of weeks ago for my interview with the Herald, you more than hinted that if you were to be elected leader, there would be a pretty significant overhaul in the party structures.
Yeah.
In terms of office holders, office bearers, the party executive, advisors, maybe some promoted posts. Quite often in a leadership campaign, backroom deals get done to ensure that certain people, in return for favours, hang on to certain jobs. But you were pretty clear with me, and yeah, you were pretty clear that there would be personnel changes. Do you think that was wise at that time, given that the people who are running the campaign may be the ones who could be vulnerable to those changes, so to speak?
Well, I think in terms of party democracy, that's, I wouldn't back down from saying that. I think that's absolutely the right thing to say. I think the membership are feeling like they have very little say in the direction that the party is going in, and as a political party we need to involve our membership. They are the people that help us win elections, and so if we don't make people feel valued and able to contribute to the policies of the party, I don't think that's tenable, and I think that democracy needs to be improved. We don't have to do anything too crazy or change things too much. All we need to do is go back to the structures that the party used to have a few years ago. I think things have been changed and it's become very centralised, and I want to get away from that, and I want to bring everyone back together and have proper conference discussions where we can really talk about policy and everyone can say what they think about things. I think that's important. But in terms of government and advisors, I think government is tiring. I think everyone recognises that, and if we are going to continue in the way that we need to do, because we need to have trust, the public need to trust us in order to be able to vote for independence, then I think we do need to freshen up the team, yes.
You also hinted that, well, you didn't hint, you said quite expressly that there was a massive gap, a massive division between the official professional party, the career wing, so to speak, and the wider Yes movement.
Yeah.
And you more or less said that the Yes movement had been stood down, almost by stealth. And you talked about, if you were to become leader, almost a separation of powers, where you and your team got on with governing the country, for the country, and allowing the Yes movement to do what they do.
Yeah.
Why has that, in your opinion, come about? Why, over the last few years, from the high of 2015 and filling the hydro, are we now 5 or 6 years later in a situation where the SNP is divided, not just down the middle, but across and in so many issues, and where, in the conversations I've had over the last few years with rank and file members, they've never felt more marginalised by the official party.
Yeah.
So why has that happened, and how do you go about healing those divisions?
Well, that's what I think a key role of the person that wins this leadership contest is. We need to heal the rifts in our own party first and foremost. So I'd agree with you that there's some work to be done there, and by freeing things up and going back to the democratic structures in the party that we had before, I hope that will start to heal those rifts there. One of the main things I think I want to do is set the independence movement free, not have it controlled by the SNP. It doesn't need to be controlled by the SNP. I think there's been this interest in trying to rigidly, be the voice of the Yes campaign and the only expression of it. And I think that's a mistake. I think obviously we are the political force behind the move for independence, but clearly there's a much wider movement, other political parties, people that are not in a political party, businesses, think tanks, etc. And so I want to bring all of them together into an independence convention and let them set their own structure for how they run that, decide, elect who's going to be the head of that organisation or however they want to do it, and set them free to go out and do that. And I think that if we can all work together in that way, that's the way we're going to get to independence, not if we're all fighting each other.
In particular, I've been hearing a lot of concerns about how the National Executive Committee is run. And I've heard words and phrases such as stitch up, control freakery, accusations of bullying, intimidation, deep hostility to certain individuals if they're regarded as not towing the party line.
Yeah.
And even in some occasions a poison at the heart of the party.
Yeah.
How do you go about reforming the NEC? Because that, in my opinion, has led to the alienation of certain groups, certain individuals who were strong campaigners in 2014.
Yeah, I think there has been a move to try to, again, centralise that and get out of that organisation what the leadership wanted, rather than letting that organisation choose for itself what it wants to support or not support. This idea that there's only one way to think about everything, to me that's not going to work. We have to be able to let people with different views. I mean, we are a broad church, but I think we've come away from that. There's one right way to be, or one right way to think about everything, and then anyone else that doesn't subscribe to that viewpoint is demonised. You're in the wrong party. They're not in the wrong party. I think we are stronger when we have people who have different views and we can all work together, rather than, I don't like this idea of this control freakery where everyone's got to be saying and thinking the same things. That doesn't work for me, and I don't think it works for a lot of the members either. What
first attracted you to the idea of independence? Because nothing from what I could see in your career beforehand, I mean, you're not part of the party machinery.
No.
You worked for a significant time in England.
Yeah.
You had a professional career working with, kind of highly qualified professional middle class people who would not naturally be independent supporters. So was there a specific event or a specific encounter that led you to start thinking about Scotland determining its own future?
I think I'd always considered Scotland to be a country, but I hadn't sort of formalised that in terms of the political side. But I definitely always consider Scotland to be a country, and I think as well, when you've been brought up in Scotland and then you've lived in England, you have quite a good sense about the differences in the two countries and the political differences as well, and the different ways that people think. And so I definitely could always see that difference between, having been brought up in Scotland and then lived away, and I've lived in Australia as well. So I think that maybe that gives you a slightly different perspective. And I also used to wonder if, through having lived away, that I wasn't subject to a lot of the conditioning, and bear with me here, but I think I was born in the 70s, and I wonder if that is when the Scots were very conditioned, the too weird, too poor, too stupid thing. So if you haven't lived that, when I came back in, I didn't think that at all. I just didn't have that viewpoint, because I'd been brought up away, as a lot of people are. That phrase that you're more Scottish when you don't live in Scotland. So it was a bit like that, me and my family living in England, but very much feeling proud of being Scottish and Scottish achievements and accomplishments and innovation and all, that kind of stuff. That I was over it, really proud to be Scottish. Then when I came back, and that was around about the time when the SNP started to rise to power, and then this idea about the Scottish independence referendum came along. And I hadn't thought that much about it until it then was a question that you needed to be able to answer. How were you going to vote? And so I was asked that probably around about 2012, and my husband was there, and he said, "Oh, well, we'll be voting no." And I said, "Hang on a minute, I said, I don't think I'll be voting no. And so I was sort of an instinctive yes voter, if you like. But I went off, did some research, and then I was like, yeah, I'm a yes voter.
So with that experience of having lived in England, worked with English people, I was thinking about this when you mentioned in our interview, well, you pledged in our interview that it would be, you're going for all future elections, 50% plus one, effectively, if not UDI, then something quite close to it, that then giving you the justification to immediately open negotiations and to go to Europe and say this is the gold standard. Some would say that there's a bit of wishful thinking in that, because apart from anything else, have any feelers been put out to Europe? Has there been any indications as to how the European nations would, to what extent they would accept more than 50% voting for a party of independence with an independence agenda?
Yeah.
Would they accept that? Has there been any diplomacy, soft diplomacy overtures?
Not by me, obviously, because I'm not in a position to do that, because I'm not currently, don't have all the civil servants, etc. at my disposal. But it wouldn't have to just be Europe. It could be the rest of the international community. It doesn't have to just be Europe. And I just want to say it's not UDI. I want to be really clear about that. It isn't. So it would just be that Scotland is very clear what it's voting for. The UK knows what Scotland is voting for, and the international community would know as well. And it's not a mandate for a referendum. It would be a mandate to open negotiations, so everyone's very clear what they're voting for. And I also want to say that I don't want it to just be 50% plus one.
Yeah.
You know, that's the minimum of a majority, but I hope it'll be much higher than that, and I would like to think that it would be.
Some would say that because of the divisions in the party in the last couple of years, I know that for some reason SNP Central Command have suddenly stopped giving membership figures. There's a general assumption that there has been quite a significant migration.
Yeah.
That in the next 2 years at least, it's going to be very, very difficult to get anywhere near 50% plus one, given certain questions about the way the party is run and the performance of the Scottish Government on key issues domestically. How do you address that? How do you kind of reach out over the immediate yes movement to the wider public?
So obviously the SNP was a phenomenal success. If you think about how many members we had, you know, around about sort of 2015, 2016, I think we're up as high as 127,000 at one point, which is extraordinary, really. So you would probably anticipate that wouldn't continue long term. I have asked the party for the current membership figures, and I haven't been told what they are, so I'm not actually clear what the current membership of the SNP is. I think we have lost a few members, but I can only say that anecdotally, because I can obviously see my own branch membership figures are a bit reduced, probably about 30% down, and if that's extrapolated across the country, then maybe that gives us an indication. But I've had a lot, and I've also had a lot of people write to me, obviously over the gender recognition. A lot of people have written to me and said, I've left the party, you know, I left over this, or I've left over GRR. And I've also had a lot of people write to me recently and tweet me about this type of thing, that they've said that if I become the leader, they will rejoin the party. So some of them are not in any party right now, some have gone to other parties, but they've been up front and they've said to me, you know, that if I become leader, they'll rejoin the party. But in terms of getting the majority vote, it wouldn't just have to be the SNP. It could be any of the other pro-independence parties. I'm going to go and speak to them all as well and talk to them about this idea and see if I can get them on board with this idea of joining in with that. And actually, we've been quite close to the 50% in recent years, so I don't think it's, I certainly don't think it's an insurmountable hurdle to reach, especially not if it's all the pro-independence parties.
Over the last few years, the weakest offering, or the weakest part of the SNP's offering, has been the economic prospectus. Annually, the GERS figures reveal horrifying deficits, projected deficits. The press, being largely unionist, feed on that, as they ought to. And there's a perception that the SNP's response to these has been very weak, very little detail, offers very little scope for optimism. And then you go further and say that within a few months we can have our own currency. So I'm trying to kind of balance that, because that's then two challenges. One challenge over the deficit, potential uncertainty of setting up a new currency. Has much work gone into that? You know, how much detail have you drilled into to make that work?
Well, the Scottish Currency Group have been working on this for some time, and you'll know that that's a very large group who've been doing quite a lot of work on this, and there's senior bankers and economics professors that are involved in that. And actually, yesterday there was an article in the Times from another very senior economist, Tony Mackay, who has advised the World Bank, and he's also advised other countries in setting up their central banks and their currencies, backing the plan that I'd set out. For instance, the reason I'm suggesting the currency, that we move to a Scottish currency, is that if we don't, we're very exposed. So if you don't control the currency that you're using, you're very exposed. And there's only about 4 countries in the world that don't have their own currency out of the 200 countries. And one of them, which I think was Montenegro, during COVID had to go to the IMF for a bailout. So we're really, we're taking a risk with the Scottish economy if we don't transition to a Scottish currency quite quickly. And I think that we need to start talking to the public about this, the fact that it's normal to have your own currency, the fact that, I don't know if you've got a Revolut card, a lot of people have, and on your phone you can have an account with different currencies in it. So I think it should be easier to kind of, because of technology, to get that message over to people that it's nothing to be afraid of, that it's normal, and this is what will help Scotland to become successful. And I think we have to grasp that thistle. We can't be talking about independence and then engage with the detail of what that would mean for people. And we know that contributed to us not being able to make the case in 2014. So we do have to have these conversations. And part of the offering that I'm making to the SNP members is that rather than sitting back, having debates about this and talking and all being hypothetical about things like currency, I'm suggesting that if I become the leader, I will start working on these things now. So we will see what we can do under devolution in terms of making progress towards a central bank. The idea being that by the time Scotland votes, passes a majority vote to become independent, and we conclude the negotiations, that we can change to a currency quite quickly because we've already done all the preparatory work.
So you talked about Montenegro being forced to go to the IMF for a loan, but isn't that what we more or less did, even though we're not independent, with the UK government during COVID? Where else would we have got?
Well, that's a central bank, isn't it? So the UK has a central bank in it. It prints money for the whole of the country. So at the moment, we don't have control over that.
Yeah, but the UK government and sterling is supported, has had hundreds of years of trust. A lot of people would be thinking that if we had our own currency, had set it up just a year or so prior to COVID, and who knows, another pandemic could happen in the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
How robust would a new currency be in coping with a massive society-changing event such as that, which required the UK government and the strength of its currency to go into massive debt simply to keep the lights on?
Yeah. But that's the point of having the central bank, is it gives you that flexibility so that you can run your own monetary policy. And if you need to increase liquidity, which often countries need to do, and obviously lots of countries did during the pandemic, then you can do that. So actually having your own currency reduces the risk to the economy rather than increases the risk. It's very important that you have that control.
See, my problem with that is that there's an assumption which I share, that in the last 8 years, well, actually going back to 2007 when the SNP got into power, there was a reasonable assumption by ordinary SNP members and the wider public that a lot of that work ought really to have been done over the last 16 years.
Yes.
And to talk about it now and want to set it up in a potentially short space of time. Again, there's a degree of wishful thinking, and why wasn't this addressed?
Well, that's one of my main issues. Is I don't understand why this hasn't been done. So I'm suggesting that we remedy that and we start working on things right away. One of the things that I think is the most important about this is that we have to build confidence with the public that we can meet all these challenges with an independent Scotland, because I don't think enough people are going to feel comfortable enough to vote for independence unless they can see these questions are being answered, but maybe in a more practical way, rather than just giving an answer or doing a white paper that's like a doorstop, that you can say to people, look, here's the infrastructure we're already setting up. So that's why I'm suggesting that we have the commission, which will then work on creating the planning and the infrastructure ahead of the vote. We then communicate that to the public, so in a sort of a progress report updates, so they can see that progress happening. And that, I think, will build confidence in the public that Scotland has the infrastructure and it's ready to go, and it can become independent and be successful. And coming back to your point about the jurors, but I don't think we should be accepting that. We all know that that was set up for political purposes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was set up to bolster, reinforce the idea
for
that
the UK.
The strong shoulders of the UK.
So my question would be, why are we accepting that? It seems to me there's a large amount of people who would say that the figures contained in that are not accurate, and they don't give us any idea of how to predict, what position an independent Scotland would be in. And so if I become the leader, I'm going to get rid of that. Now the UK might want to carry on using it. I can't do anything about that. But we need to come up with a different way of measuring the Scottish economy that's more accurate, and it can help us build on what position Scotland would be in if we were independent. So I think that's a priority. So I'm going to look into that. I've had a conversation with Richard Murphy about this already.
See, I hear that, and it's all fine and dandy. But when the SNP, which portrays itself as left of centre,
you don't think we're left
when
of
it
centre?
suits it, no,
okay,
not in a million years.
Okay.
When we start talking about economic think tanks and economic advisors, we basically have captains of industry, people who are the building blocks of runaway capitalism, and very, very few voices and very, very few influences from the left, because of the perception that the left will break the bank, tax high. However, there are hundreds of thousands of people who don't have any spending wherewithal at the moment. Those people are at the bottom of society, and surely putting money in their hands, giving them job security, giving them a dignified way of life, opens up the economy. But you never, despite promises over many years by the SNP to represent these communities and these people, the same faces, the same multi-millionaire businessmen are those who are drafted in to advise the government. We have the richest landowner in Europe, the Duke of Buccleuch. His bag carrier is on the team of economic advisors, various other captains of capitalism. And so there's a kind of an absence of confidence, not just with the trade union movement, not by the so-called hard left, but in these communities who hear the offerings and the manifestos of various SNP MPs and MSPs that they're going to reorder society in favour of their communities, and then every so often there's an announcement that some multimillionaire who's already made his money is advising Nicola Sturgeon. So I get a little bit kind of queasy when I hear SNP people talking about including or going first of all to big business voices.
Well, I haven't been listening to any big business voices. I've been talking to people at Commonweal, so I would agree with you. We need to make sure we are listening to a whole range of voices, and I'm as sceptical about that as I think you are. And I think we need to do better in some areas. Sometimes it's challenging to think of what you can do. I do think we are trying to do things with like one or at least one or maybe two hands tied behind our back, certainly in terms of the economy, employment law and that sort of thing. We don't have full powers there. There is undoubtedly more we could be doing, and I think there has been a frustration of groups who want to put forward maybe slightly more alternative policy ideas that they didn't have the route in to talk, and they weren't being listened to. So I think that's one of the things I want to make clear to people, is that I want to listen to everyone and bring everyone together, and listen to these other ideas. Maybe there are creative ways we can solve these problems under devolution. I think there's definitely some things we can do under devolution, but we also need to be upfront with people and say that actually the best thing for Scotland is to get out of the UK, because we are, we're in an environment where we can't fix everything with the powers that we do have. I know people often don't want to hear that, and particularly Labour, in the chamber, they'll just shout, oh, you've got the power, you could do this, you could do that, but you can't do everything. A fairly fixed budget, there is a limit to what you can do. Could we have been doing more? Yes, I think we could have. And I would like to see what we can do, but working towards independence. I think the energy market, the costs that people are facing right now, that's the biggest threat to people's livelihoods at the moment that I can see. I think people are going to lose their homes over this. If you're used to paying £100 for your fuel bill and it's now 400, that could be more than some people's rent. It's not sustainable. People can't. Where are they going to get this? Most people don't have that level of disposable income. Where are they going to get the money from? Now we can't fix that. Under under devolution, we don't have the powers to fix it. And Brexit is obviously having a massive impact on the economy, on our NHS, because we haven't got the people to fill some of these roles. So it's having a big impact on us, I think, disproportionately as well in Scotland. So my view is that in order for Scotland to have the best chance to solve some of these social problems that you're talking about, we need the full powers. And I will just say, I do not want Scotland to be independent just to be like the UK. I don't want Scotland to be like that. What's the point of that? You might as well just stay in the UK. You want it to be better and fairer and greener.
So there's two areas where we do have control, and where working class people and our poorest communities are suffering, and suffering badly. One is in the annual toll of drugs deaths.
Yeah.
Maybe less so in the Highlands and Islands, and we talked about this earlier, with the prospects of oil jobs, energy jobs, and balancing that with the mission for net zero economy. In terms of the drugs deaths, there are various experts with lived experience. I'm thinking of Favour UK, Anne-Marie Ward. I'm thinking of Lockie, the writer and activist, who I don't think they're being listened to. So, yeah, just as okay, we have to reach out and bring in economic experts to help address deficits, to help address problems of future economy. It beggars belief with me that the party of government hasn't reached out and included people like those two voices to curb the awful annual drugs death toll. Yeah. And when we spoke last week, you again more than hinted that you wanted to open government up, and that you'd be prepared to work with people who not only might not be independent SNP supporters, but not even supporters of independence.
Yes.
How would you go about that? Because that's quite radical.
Well, you need the best people. We're going to be looking at people's party membership cards before they come in. If somebody's got a good idea to solve some of these real problems that Scotland has, then, or experience or skills in that area, then we need to listen to them, not just because of their party allegiances. I think we can't do that. So certainly on the drugs thing, it's not. I have friends who are in recovery, so I obviously have listened to them and how they've spoken about it. But I was reading an interesting article on this last week, and about how the culture is really important in how we go about this. And that article is suggesting, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that we are not putting enough resource into projects like LEAP. So that's, I think, a peer-to-peer support model for abstinence to get people off substances and back into being more in control of their lives. At the moment, I think we have a lot of people that, and I'm just going to use this phrase because that's the way they've expressed it to me, that they're parked on methadone and they want to get off, and they go to the GP, and there doesn't seem to be a pathway for them to come out through that. I went to a recovery cafe in my constituency. It's just up the road from my constituency office, and it was entirely staffed by people who are in recovery themselves. So they've been through this, and they've got the T-shirt, if you like, and they're able to then guide people through it as well. And we need to have a mentality in Scotland that it is absolutely realistic to expect that we can get people off substances and we can get them into recovery, and that is we can do it, and we need to put that message out to people that we can do that for them if we can get them into the right programs.
Well, I hope so, because what I'm hearing, I interviewed Anne-Marie Ward, the Chief Executive of Faber UK, which stands for Faces and Voices of Recovery. And she and others are painting a picture of government treating people who have lived experience, no matter how long they've been in recovery, as somehow always being tainted and disfigured by their previous experience, and therefore not to be trusted when making future strategies to curb it. And again, there's this disconnect between the SNP representing itself as the party to stand in the gap, doing what Labour hadn't done, or being standing accused of not having done, and them doing it, and a massive gap between saying and doing. And I think people are looking for direct action. And in the leadership debates, I haven't heard enough about strategies.
We've done 4 hustings, no one's mentioned drugs. It hasn't come up yet.
Well, drugs, or even,
I thought it would, but it hasn't.
We're sitting here in the centre of Glasgow, which is the most populous part of Scotland, which basically drives the economy. And I can tell you that the issue of the next time that the index of multiple deprivation is published, I'll tell you 4 or 5 communities, not within 2 miles of here, which will occupy the top 10 positions. Further down the coast, in Inverclyde and Greenock, for instance, Paisley, 1 or 2 in Dundee. And these will be the same communities that featured in the top 10 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years before that, 3 years before that. This all happened on the watch of an SNP government. It didn't happen on the watch. They were already poor. It
hasn't been resolved.
But again, in 16 years of government, the dial hasn't moved 1 inch. And so what detail would you... It's probably, it's definitely too much to ask you to give me the absolute detail now, but is that a priority?
I can't give you the detail now because I haven't had time to look into this. So I've had a quick look at some people that were suggesting that the way that we are looking at the drugs crisis, that we need to involve exactly what you've said, that we need to involve recovery experts with lived experience, and that the peer-to-peer support model is the way to go with this. And that certainly chimes with my experience of my friend who's told me the same thing. So he was in AA, which is also a less formal peer-to-peer support model, but is 17 years sober, and feels that it doesn't work. I mean, even he would say to you, this model doesn't work for everybody. There's nothing that works for everyone, but it is definitely a key part of this, and that in Scotland we're saying that we value that, but I don't know if the funding is following it. Now, I'd have to check into that, and I haven't done that yet, because as you can imagine, I had about a week to prepare my policies, and I haven't been able to get into this level of detail. But I think it's certainly something that I want to look into, and I know it's a source of great frustration that we're not getting to grips with this as fast as we could be. So it's definitely something we need to look at. So
let's talk about net zero, how we get there, and how we balance the need to get there with the needs of communities, especially in the Highlands and Islands, which rely on oil and carbon energy. The so-called just transition. How just can that transition be to look after these jobs and these communities without whom, like so many in the northeast of England, will be left twisting in the wind following the disappearance of mining, heavy industry, fishing, etc.
Well, we can't have that. There's something like 70,000 jobs at stake here, and it is the last heavy industry. A lot of working class jobs are involved in this. That's obviously it's a well-paid industry, and certainly the way Scotland works, in the north, particularly in the northeast, obviously, there are many communities where the people that work in oil and gas would not be able to get an equivalent job locally. So then what happens when these jobs go? Are these communities all going to end up hollowed out because no one will be able to afford to live there anymore? We can't have that. So I'm very clear that we need to be supporting the jobs in that industry, because there's no point running down, making people unemployed out of our own oil and gas sector and then be importing oil and gas from other countries which have lower environmental standards and lower standards on human rights and things like that as well, or may even be hostile to us internationally. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And obviously if you're a country as well, as we're hoping Scotland will be soon, you also need to think about your energy security. I think that's something the UK doesn't do a very good job of. It doesn't think, everything's so marketised, it doesn't think in terms of energy security, which obviously was brought into sharp relief when the situation between Russia and Ukraine over the last few months. So I think that's also something we need to think about. So the plan to speed up the transition, I feel, is not being balanced out by the development of the jobs in the green sector. And we can't put people out of work unless we've got somewhere else to put them. So my plan would be that we do this in a timely manner. That means we can switch people over and hopefully use some money that's raised from oil and gas, although obviously this would be when Scotland's independent, to invest in the renewable sector. So I went to look at a wave and tidal testing facility, which is part of Edinburgh University, last week. And they were saying to me, Scotland is leading the world really in these types of technologies. And the seed funding part is there for the innovation. But the scaling up money is missing. So you need millions basically to take something, a wave energy device, and get it to the point where it can go into production and it can be used in Scotland. And we want to use them in Scotland, but we also want to then be selling them to the rest of the world and creating an industry out of it in the way that I think Denmark created an industry out of the wind turbines. We want to be doing that. We don't want to miss the boat on this again, and create that supply chain and then the skilled jobs that go with that. So it's really important that we get this right.
But Alex Salmond in 2001 was saying this and talking about Scotland being the Saudi Arabia of renewables.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here 22 years later, we've more or less
we can't
parcelled
invest.
up.
We haven't got the money to spend on investing in these scaling up these industries.
Well, yeah, that's one part of the equation, but another part is you talked about setting up a commission or speaking to various experts to make good or to maximise our advantages there. Hopefully you won't be speaking to the same people that were advising the government that selling off 5 massive plots of Scotland's coastal seabed for less than a tenth of the profits of one of the 5 energy companies, because whoever was advising the government then has let Scotland down and has made us a laughing stock. And again, this goes back to my early point about the people that the Scottish Government listens to and seeks advice from.
I think we have, and I've been in government and I can see this myself, we've got to the point where we have, it seems as if, this is a perception, that there's a very short list of people that we go to for advice, and we can't have that. This is a country, we can't just go into these 4 people for advice on everything. It's not going to work. So yeah, I would agree with you. We have to open this up, make sure we're listening to the right people. I mean, they don't even necessarily have to be people who are in Scotland. We have technology now. We could be listening to the best advisors on any topic globally to advise us on what the best thing to do for Scotland is.
Well, again, it seems to some people that the people we do listen to happen to be in the client list of 1 or 2 favoured lobbying firms, which are not a million miles away from the seat of government. But that's maybe another conversation for another time.
Yeah.
With regard to our relationship with, or rather the SNP's relationship with the trade unions, again, a lot of work prior to the independence referendum in 2014 was done by people like Chris Stevens, for instance, to decouple large sections of the trade union movement from its traditional relationship with the Labour Party, to then be in a position where they were actively supporting independence. But since then, including by the leader of the council that looks after this city, my city, there's just been a steady drumbeat of suspicion. And do you think there has to be a reset in the relationship between an SNP government and the trade union movement, especially when you're looking at protecting jobs in the oil industry, the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, I think there does.
There's a sense by a lot of these people that they've been betrayed by the SNP, and some of the invective that's been flung at them by people who I think should probably know better. I think, for instance, with the bin strike, immediately after COVID in this city, the refuse workers had basically, like other public sector workers, but more than others because of the nature of their job, were risking their health by still keeping the streets clean in the back courts. And within a few months, they're looking for quite often backdated pay increases, and they were referred to or likened to Stalinists, fascists, simply for saying, well, you thought we were heroes, we risked our lives, and we're asking for kind of reasonable demands. And I didn't see all that many SNP politicians on. It's improved slightly in the last kind of wave of strikes, but not that many appearing on picket lines, being actively supportive of the trade unions. Whereas the Labour Party up here, despite what Keir Starmer did, and you know, to be fair to Anas Sarwar, there was no shortage of Labour people joining the picket lines.
No, we need to have a good relationship with the trade unions, that's obvious. And a good working relationship where we're listening to each other, and I think there's a lot the government can learn from listening to the unions, for sure. The union that I worked with when I was in government was the FBU. I used to go and talk to them, but I think I had a good relationship with them. I tried to be upfront with them about what the challenges that I had, so everyone's clear, the parameters that everybody's operating under, but I always respected their opinions on the way things should be run. And obviously, in terms of pay, for instance, the Scottish Government wasn't involved in that because we're not the employer, but we were working with the employer to make sure they felt they were supported financially so that they were able to work and get offers that were hopefully acceptable. I am going to try and speak to Jake Malloy and have a conversation with him about where he feels things could be improved in terms of the relationship with the government and that union. And we've got a trade unions hustings actually coming up in the next few days, so that'll be interesting to hear from them about the type of things that they think we need to be doing better.
When we spoke the other week, we were talking about the Greens, specifically about their threat, or reported threat, that they would have to review their membership of the government, their participation in the government, if you or Kate Forbes were elected. You didn't use the phrase tail wagging the dog, but I will use it for you because that's what I think you were inferring. Has there been any contact between you and them? What would you do?
I haven't had any, no.
On being elected leader, would you reach out to them?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to reach out to all the pro-independence parties, I think today, and try and get a chat with all of them to talk to them about the Independence Convention. So, but not specifically on the issue of government. Of course, if this is meant to be growing up government, really, we probably shouldn't be making statements in the press about who we prefer and all that. It's obviously up to it's an SNP contest, and it isn't really for the Greens to be trying to say who they would prefer or whatever, publicly anyway, at least. So I think that it's already creates a kind of a difficult environment if if Kate or I do become the leader and then they've already made kind of disparaging statements about your policy positions in the press. It's not a good start to a new working relationship. I feel that the Greens have had, in my view, a detrimental effect in some areas of government, not all, but in some. And there was a couple of policies that I was trying to pursue in government that I knew were not supported by the Greens, and so I knew that would cause challenges. But clearly we're two different political parties, we have different priorities, and that I think Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney obviously were very keen on having this partnership. I think some people in Scotland maybe have thought it's been positive, it's been good, and other people will feel that it's had a negative effect. So I think we need to review how it's working for the people of Scotland, and I'll certainly, if I become the leader, I'll be sitting down with the Greens to talk to them about how or if we can take this forward and continue it or not.
Last question then. Over the last 2-3 years, certain individuals in the party, including Joanna Cherry, your colleague, but dozens of others, all women, have made complaints about bullying, harassment by fellow members, some quite senior, and it's been alleged that literally hundreds of these complaints still currently reside at party headquarters and are either being ignored or rejected out of hand. What do you say to those women if you become leader?
Well, I think we have to do things in a different way. I was not happy with the way that I saw my colleagues like Joan McAlpine and Joanna Cherry being treated for their views. We have a code of conduct in the party. You're not actually allowed to criticise other elected members, and yet we see this time and time again, members of the party viciously attacking elected members, almost always women, on social media. Now I know social media, you know, it's a different way of operating, and clearly it's different than it would have been 20 years ago when there would be more limited ways, for instance, of saying things about your colleagues. But I think we are all in the same party. We need to work together. We need to respect. We aren't, like we were saying before, about having different views. I'm more than happy for people in the party, if I become leader, to have different views on different topics. In fact, I would encourage it. I think it's important. But I think there's a role for leadership here. And I did say that. Do you remember a few weeks ago when some of my colleagues were at a protest and they were photographed next to signs saying decapitate TERFs? So I had a conversation then with the WHIPS team and said, you know, that leadership really need to be involved in this, they need to be de-escalating the situation. I felt we were heading towards a situation where someone was going to get hurt, and that there was nothing coming from the top to try to de-escalate this and ensure that, you know, politicians were not standing next to signs saying decapitate TERFs. I was really upset to see that, and I felt there was a role for leadership in trying to bring the party back together and heal these rifts. And unfortunately, it hasn't happened. But I would like to think that if I become the leader, that I can try and draw a line onto this, make sure that people are treated with respect. If there are outstanding complaints, that they need to be dealt with. I don't obviously have oversight over anything to do with that, but I have other people have said to me that they have outstanding complaints that have not been addressed, going back to as far as 2018. So we need to be getting a grip on this. And I've actually put forward an SNP action plan that's for internal party democracy, where we try to get, bring people into the party, make sure we look after them, and various different ways. But I think complaints is certainly an important part of that. People need to feel that they're being treated with respect.